So when we first came to Sneem, my wife Michele and myself, one of the really nice things we found was that people seemed to have time to talk to you, and it became very apparent very quickly that part of the conversation was to find out as much about you as possibly could. And the background to this story really stems from those initial meetings. Surprising how much information people listening found out about us within about 24 hours of us putting the key in the door. So this story starts in 2016, at which time, aged 56, I'd found myself to be in a position where I was no longer required by the workforce, and temporary work, but hadn't had permanent work for a couple of years. And also Michele had found herself in a similar position. She was actually had a temporary employment at the time, but we'll find ourselves quite depressed by the whole situation, having been in good work for up to that period of time. I found myself visiting the dentist one day in the autumn of 2016, and the receptionist took the initial notes about who you were and your PRSI number, that kind of thing. And she happened to say, I noticed you're same age as my husband, her husband, and that you're unemployed. She said, how are you finding that? And I said, I'm finding it really difficult. I feel actually very depressed by it all. And she said to me, have you ever heard of St. Martha and the fact that if you say 7 Hail Marys to St. Martha on 7 consecutive Tuesdays, she'll help you find your way. Don't ask her for anything specific, just ask for her help to find your way. And I said, well, I hadn't heard of that thing, but I would definitely give it a try. And it turns out that St. Martha, I'm sure many of you will know this already, but St. Martha is actually Mary's sister, and she was one responsible for asking Jesus' help in bringing her husband Lazarus to life. So this Tuesday came, and I went to the local church and said my 7 Hail Marys, having previously asked Michele and our 2 daughters, Catherine and Nicola, to do similar prayers, or at least remember St. Martha in their own prayers for a period of time to help me find my way. I came back home having said the 7 Hail Marys, and lo and behold, they'd forgotten all about this, didn't know anything, couldn't remember it. And then the very next day, Michele sent me an email saying, have a look at this house. It's in a place called Sneem, County Kerry. It's a bit more than we can afford, but perhaps you could go and have a look at it and see what you think. Now, we did have a connection with Kerry in that we we're original shareholders in the Dingle whisky distillery, but that's another story I can tell another time perhaps. But I went down in the car, about 4.5 hours, 5 hours drive down at the time to get to Sneem. Took one look at the place and I thought, oh right, this is really going to be what Michele's looking for. But it was that bit more than we could afford. Anyway, I chanced my arm a little bit and asked the guy who was selling the house on behalf of the owner, a German lady by the name of Gerda, if he would keep the house for us, at least long enough for my wife to come down and have a look. And he said yes, he would. So I was driving back up the road and having stopped the car and phoned Michele, because you're not allowed to phone while you're driving. Told her the good news, and we both agreed that it would be worthwhile her coming down on that weekend, on the Saturday. So Wednesday I made the trip down, and on the way back up to Dublin, I had a message through from a financial advisor to say that if you had a pension fund in the UK and you wanted to bring it to Ireland, and you also fit certain other criteria, like you'd lived here for X number of years and you were over 55, then you could release 25% of that lump sum, tax-free lump sum, which was great. So I went through the whole exercise with this financial advisor, came out of that process and thought, well, this is great, we've now got enough money to pay off the house in full, and we'll have enough money to live off for the first couple of years before the pension fund comes in. Just as I was leaving the financial advisor, he said to me, how did you find out about us? And I said, I didn't find you, you found me through this social media site called Facebook. This guy says, I don't know anything about Facebook or social media. What on earth is that about? And I said, well, it's quite common nowadays. And anyway, he shouted up the stairs to his assistant, a young lady who came down and explained to her that one of the interns that they'd had in the summer had been asked to research social media and advertise them on social media, and sure enough, that's exactly what he's done. And yeah, that's how we found David, through that social media work that this intern had done. So that was, one bit of good luck or fortune that came out of it. So Saturday comes and we are travelling down here to Sneem. Of course, Michele takes one look at the house and, same as myself, realised that, yeah, that was definitely going to be it. And we did the deal on the shake of a hand, if you like, at that point in time. And we were going to have this house as long as we agreed that it was going to be for a permanent residence and it wasn't going to be as a holiday home. That was one criteria that the seller had. So we went down to Sneem, and the place that was opened at the time was Kelly's Cafe. Went in there and happened to be speaking to the now owner, Pauline, and had a lovely cup of coffee and a bit of breakfast, I think. And then as we were walking out of the cafe, we looked around and said, you know what, we have actually been here before. In 2015, we took some time out and did a trip around Ireland and then also to Australia, where one of our daughters is living. And then also to New Zealand. And we felt at the time that via that trip, we would get a sense of where we were going to end up. And for one reason and another, it didn't actually work out at that time. But nevertheless, we felt extremely grateful that we'd actually found ourselves in a place that we had actually visited just the once before. And then we went into the parish church, St Michael's, and after saying prayers to St Martha to thank her for helping us find our way, we noticed on the wall there's a plaque, and it talks about some nuns who had been in the convent adjoining the church, who'd been asked to set up a new convent in Australia, in a place called Geraldton, which is Western Australia, about 7 hours north of Perth. And funnily enough, or by coincidence, because of the health of St Martha, we had actually visited this convent school because Michele has a cousin, Lynette O'Malley, who had gone to school there. And also I had a cousin two cousins who were teachers, Kathy and Kevin Pilkington, who also taught in that school. We were told this at the time that there'd been nuns from Ireland who'd set it all up, but had no way of knowing that it was going to be Sneem. And there, sure enough, is this plaque on the wall in the church to make that connection. Again, health of St Martha, to find somewhere that we can now consider to be home. The other interesting coincidences, if you like, was that I went to the bank to explain to the guys in the bank that they would be receiving a big lump sum of money coming in, and the guy who took all the information down and helped us through the process was actually the guy who'd signed me up to the bank many years ago, and his name was John Moriarty. And he said to me, where are you going to? And I said, oh, we're going to buy a house and retire in Kerry. And he said, what part of Kerry? And I said, oh, this place you'll never heard of, a place called Sneem. And he says, well, actually, I do know Sneem very well. He said, I was actually born in Kyle Daniel, in the house just across the road from the Blind Piper. And I've still got family names, family down there. Moriarty's are well known in Sneem. Another coincidence was, as I would tell this story to anybody who would listen to us, in truth, because a lot of the time people would come up to you and say, how did you find yourselves in Sneem? And I would tell, it was St. Martha who brought us here, and I would be able to tell them the story. I happened to be saying this story to somebody in O'Shea's pub in Sneem, to somebody, and unbeknown to me, it had been overheard by somebody sitting at the bar. And this guy came up to us, John came up to us shortly after this, and he said, you know, it was an amazing story I overheard. And he said, the other funny part of it is, when I went to work the next day, I opened my toolbox, and inside the toolbox was this prayer card to St. Martha. And he says, there's no way I would have put that prayer card in that toolbox, but it had appeared there. And he said, I've no memory of ever picking it up, but it appeared there. So he went about and made sure he said his 7 Hail Marys on 7 consecutive Tuesdays to see if he found his way. And there are plenty of other people who've told me subsequently that, you know, perhaps they didn't have as much good fortune as I had, but they did have good fortune in finding work and finding new ways, new places to live, or new houses to live in, and that kind of thing. So it does really work. But I think one of the nice parts of this story is you don't have to be a believer to believe that it was St. Martha who provided this steer to us. But I think you do have to accept that there is an awful lot of coincidences and that there is hope there. And I hope that you will find your Sneem in life. So one of the good things about the house we have in Walla Rustic, Sneem, is it has a purpose-built studio apartment which we have put on Airbnb, and in honour of St. Martha we've called the apartment St. Martha's Studio. And any of our guests who come here, we have a brief summary of the story and why it's called St. Martha, and they will always know that that is the case. Yes, we've put a sign on the wall of Martha's Studio in recognition of her help in helping us get settled and thoroughly enjoying our time in Sneem. Beautiful place that it is.